What's going on, dudes? Nick here, or RJ Gaming, and welcome to the video I promised you. If you're wondering what the hell I'm doing in the kitchen, well, a few weeks ago, while I was on stream, I was talking to Jeff about how I've got my famous mushroom soup, and everyone said they want to know the recipe for it. So I figured, rather than just putting it in chat and having it get lost forever, why don't I make a video about it? Now, what I have here is enough ingredients for a double batch of it. Typically, I'll just make a single batch. Every now and then I'll throw in like a double, or really a triple if Jeff wants some as well. But it's super simple to make, and here's the recipe. Now, I'm gonna give you guys all the ingredients in the single batch form, which is about 2 bowls worth. Now, when I say 2 bowls, I mean something about the size of this bowl here. But today, I'm gonna be making a double. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna double everything, but let's just walk through the ingredients. For a single batch, you need a 1/4 cup of butter, which is a 1/2 stick. So when I'm making the double recipe, I use a whole stick. I also use 2 shallots or some type of substitute onion. These onions are ones that actually grew in my yard. They didn't get enough time before the heat set in and started killing them off. These are about the size of a shallot. I like oniony flavor, so that's why I've got the 3rd one in there, but the base recipe is 2 shallots. We also got 2 tablespoons of flour per batch. So in here, there's 4 tablespoons. And for the recipe, I usually use between 2 to 3 cups of chopped mushrooms per batch. So usually I'll get like one of these bigger containers and one of these smaller containers. Right now I've got some baby bellas and some white mushrooms. You could use white and brown. You could add shiitake in there if you want. It really just depends on what flavors you want to go for and how much money you have, because some mushrooms can be a little more expensive. So that's why I kind of stick to the basics. Other than that, we're just gonna need a cup of heavy whipping cream per, or again, a whole container if you're making the double. So you can see how making the double amount kind of works better. A whole stick of butter, a whole tub of heavy whipping cream. I used to use like 1/2 and 1/2, but I just think that the heavy whipping cream gives it more of like a creamier flavor. Because the star of the show is the mushrooms. It's a mushroom stew, and that's basically all you got in there. Last but not least, we've got our standard salt and pepper, and the base, which is going to be chicken stock. Now this is homemade chicken stock that we made ourselves, jarred it ourselves. If you're gonna get into that stuff, make sure you do it properly, because you don't want to die from improperly canning stuff. Oh yeah, and you're gonna need a pot to put it all in. Now, when it comes to chicken stock, you need about 15 or 16 ounces per batch. So I'm gonna need roughly somewhere around, 32 ounces. But the first thing that we need to do is we need to get our mushrooms cleaned up and our onions chopped up as well. So we're gonna clean and chop up the mushrooms, chop up the onions, and then we're going to actually just take our butter now, since we're using the whole stick, and I'm just going to throw it inside this pot. Just right in the center of the pot, boom. The next thing I'll do is I'm gonna start cutting up the onions. And the reason I do that is because while I'm cutting up the mushrooms and working on them, I let the onions sit on super low heat in the pan to really just boil down, cook down, get that oniony flavor extracted. Now, I don't think I have to remind you guys this, but whenever you're handling knives, be very careful. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to cut off the bulb of the onion there, and I'm going to kind of use this little back end as like a little handle. I'm gonna start by making a few cuts vertically down the onion, and then turn it 90 degrees and make a few cuts down there. Now, these are smaller onions, I'm not really too worried about them, but then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to grip with my fingers and start slicing up. You see how it cuts it into small little pieces. But there we go, we got the first one cut. Now this is just an example. I'm gonna show you how we do that. Then we're just gonna kind of put it on our knife, scoop it into our pot with our butter. And once we've got all the onions chopped up, I'm gonna go throw it on the heat. Dude, if you're anything like me, sometimes when you chop onions, your eyes just water. And I don't know which ones it was. I'm pretty sure it was the white onions, but one of the onions, as I was cutting them, just released so much aroma that my eyes were just killing me. I don't like to cry, so you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna make these onions cry by throwing them on the stove and getting them cooking. All right, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna turn this on as low of a heat as it will, just so I can get that butter melted in there and start caramelizing those onions. You know, I say caramelizing the onions, but I'm not actually trying to caramelize them. I don't want them toasty or brown or anything like that. I just really want to slow cook them and get all the flavor extracted. I can hear some sizzling going on in this pan. It means we're starting to get some juices flowing. Now, this is going to be one of the most tedious and time-consuming tasks of this entire process, and honestly, something I dread every time I go to make this. And that's preparing the mushrooms. Because what we have to do is we have to break out the stems from the middle, because we don't want the stems. The stems are typically harder, they're a little tougher, chewier. They'll break up the consistency of the nice, smooth mushroom stew that we're making. But I've got this wire basket here, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna rinse the mushrooms off. because there's always a lot of dirt on mushrooms. So I always give them a quick rinse, and I do this on a mushroom by mushroom basis. Now, if any of your mushrooms look bad or have a smell to them, don't use them. Now I can smell some really nice oniony aroma coming out of my pot, and I might actually turn the heat off for a little bit and let it just sit there and stew for a bit. Unfortunately, that big burner really, oh God, it's on high. Okay, well somehow I kicked my burner on high. I'm like, I smell way too much onion going on right now. I turned it up a little bit more and it kicked from the low burner to the high burner, and yeah. All right, so now that we've got our mushrooms properly destemmed and rinsed off, it's time to get them chopped up. Now, I used to have to chop every single mushroom by hand. I would kind of do it like this, where I would go into little thin strips sideways, and then I'd come along and chop the end pieces like this. But doing this for every mushroom takes a long freaking time. I mean, as you go, you get a little bit better with it. And yeah, you can kind of do a little chop work after. But you know what? There's actually an easier way that my wife found to get all these things chopped up. And that way is with this beautiful little machine here. It's a slicer. And oh my God, does this make it so much easier. So you saw how long it took me to cut up just the one mushroom. Well, check this thing out. This thing is freaking awesome. Just take a whole mushroom like this, stick it in there, boom. Again, this stuff's gonna come down to your preference, but you just load a few pieces in, push it through, push them in. I mean, this thing, I mean, we're doing like, what, 7, 8 mushrooms in the time that we could have done one by hand. If you guys want to get this thing, I'll put up an Amazon link in the description. It is an affiliate link, so if you do buy it, I'll earn a small commission for it. And no, I'm not sponsored by these guys. So now that my bowl's full, I'm gonna start taking these mushrooms and get them added into the melted butter. The heat is still on ultra low, so it's not gonna actually start cooking those any more than it is the rest. That way it's not gonna hurt it while we chop up the rest of these mushrooms. If you're making this at home and you've got this double batch going on, you're gonna look at this and think, holy crap, that is a lot of mushrooms. Yes, it does look like a lot of mushrooms, and that's because it is a lot. But the thing about mushrooms is they cook down and they shrink. When you get them hot, they'll start to release a lot of their own juices, and they start cooking in that, and it releases more steam, cooks them more, and next thing you know, it's gonna collapse by half or more. Now, I have cranked the flame up to high. I haven't added any salt or pepper on this yet. What I'm gonna do next is grab this wood spoon and start stirring it up. Here, as it's getting hot, you can start hearing that sizzling. What we wanna do is we wanna coat the mushrooms with a bit of that butter in there and keep stirring from the bottom to the top. That way, everything gets cooked evenly. Like right now, it's maybe like an inch below the little knobs on the side. As it starts to cook down, these mushrooms are gonna shrink and they're gonna let off a lot of water. It's going to tenderize the mushrooms. It's going to cook them. It's gonna help control some of the moisture that comes out of here, because if we have too much water from this, the soup's gonna be too thin. So while we're waiting, I'm gonna go ahead and get our chicken stock measured out. We're gonna need roughly between 28 and 32 ounces of liquid. It really depends on how much liquid's left after you dry out your mushrooms for that bit. You see our mushrooms are really cooking down now. Look at the color has changed on them. They've all kind of blended together. A lot of that water is coming out, and we're gonna continue boiling that off. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open up my first can of chicken stock. So one jar is 28 ounces, and there might be a chance that I do need a little bit more. I mean, when you're talking a couple ounces, you could really just use a little bit of water or leave a little bit of the extra mushroom juice in there. But now we've got our juice ready to add in. We don't add it in yet. What we have to do is get as much water out of the mushrooms as we want, cook them until they're the tenderness that we want. And once that's done, then we add in the flour, stir it together. It's immediately gonna change it from this soupy, watery mushroom mix to a very hard, thick, clumpy mess. Now, like I said, we need salt and pepper to taste, and that's it. You got the onions for the base, you've got the chicken stock to give it a little richness, but the real flavor just comes from the mushrooms themselves. Salt and pepper is one of those things that you have to add to taste. I can't tell you how much to put in because I don't know. It changes based on your ingredients and the strength of everything in there. If it feels like it's missing something, if it feels like it's too bland and not hitting the back of your tongue and the back of your throat, then you want to add more pepper, because that peppery flavor will kind of spice up like the back of your mouth. And it's find that right balance between the salt and the pepper that will make or break this soup. All right, yeah, now that looks good. You can see there's a little water left, which is fine. We're gonna want a little water to help absorb some of the flour. Now comes the hard part. What you gotta do is you gotta take your flour and distribute it evenly. And I do it in about 2 or 3 different increments. So you can see after this first one, it's going to dry up a lot of the water. Now you mostly just see the mushrooms. Now I'm gonna quickly, before anything burns, pour in the rest of the flour and then stir this in. You're gonna see that it completely changes texture. Now it's like a salad. It almost looks like a hamburger. It is thick, it is gooey, it looks kind of disgusting. But watch this, we pour in our chicken stock and we're gonna give it a stir to get some of that flour distributed. And what we wanna do now is bring this back to a boil. So now we have the butter and flour mixture mixed together inside of here. And what's gonna happen is as this thing comes back to a boil, it's gonna start activating and cooking that flour. And as the flour and butter cooks together, it's going to thicken. And this is gonna go from what it is right now, where it's just very watery and drippy, to something that once it's ready, we can take the spoonful and you'll see it slowly creep down the spoon. While that's thickening up, we're going to stir it a few times, and we're gonna take the spoon and just kind of let it run down the spoon on a slight angle, and you'll notice it'll stop being as watery and it'll start slowly moving down the spoon. Once it gets thick enough, it's pretty much done. It's hard to tell when it's thick enough. The first time you do it, you're like, oh, how do I know if it's thick enough or not? You'll notice a big difference once it starts to thicken up. It starts off very watery. When you put it on there, it'll just kind of run right off, but eventually you'll start moving it and you'll notice it'll kind of coat the spoon more and slowly kind of drip off the spoon. All right, so this is as thick as I want it to get. I mean, you could let it get a little bit thicker if you want, but you can totally tell a difference now. It's starting to stick to the sides when you swirl it up there. If we get it on the spoon, you can see that it's really thickened up a lot. And instead of just pouring right off, it really sticks to there. So now it's thick and it is ready to add the final ingredients, heavy whipping cream. We're gonna add this in, and this is immediately gonna cool it off because this has to be stored in the fridge. I've had mine on the counter for a little bit, so it's probably a little warmer than yours will be. But like I said earlier, you do not want this to come to a boil. So I'm just gonna turn this flame pretty much all the way down. We do want to heat it back up to heat up the cream and get everything mixed together in there. But now looking at the color of this soup, it is now a very creamy, thick soup. It's going to thicken up a little bit more as it heats back up, but now is the time to add in the salt and pepper. So like I told you, I can't tell you how much salt and pepper to use because it's going to change based on every batch. It's going to change based on your taste, but what I'll do is pinch a pretty decent amount and spread it through the entire pot. Now this is Himalayan salt. This is, for whatever reason, stronger than regular salt, sea salt or iodized salt. So I don't use as much, but pepper, you know, same thing, grab a decent pinch full. And it looks like a lot. I mean, that covered the whole top of that, but it's really not. And if you're not a huge fan of pepper, don't put as much in. That's, like I said, it's a whole to taste thing. Now that we've got it in there, I've got it all stirred together. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wait a couple minutes for that pepper flavor and the salt flavor to really break apart and get into the soup, and then I'm gonna test it. Here's a mistake that a lot of people make. They'll add salt and pepper, taste it right away, and be like, oh, it needs more. But the problem is that they don't give it enough time to really seep in. Think about it, the salt has to dissolve and get distributed amongst the whole pot. By adding the salt and pepper and waiting a couple minutes, it really lets the flavors get in there. We can see the edges are starting to come to a boil, so what I need to do is reduce the heat, because we do not want it to boil at all. I'm gonna stir that around real quick, and I'm going to taste a spoonful. Now be careful, this stuff's gonna be hot. It tastes really good. It's got an amazing mushroom flavor. It didn't hit the back of my throat as much as I wanted it to, so that means it needs a little bit more pepper, and I didn't taste as much salt as I like, so I'm gonna add a little bit more salt and pepper. But this is where the patience comes in, and guys, that's the key to cooking. A lot of people think you can just follow exactly what's on a recipe and it's gonna turn out great, but I can tell you, recipes are a starting point. It gives you something that is all right. But if you really, really want it to be amazing, you need to taste it. You need to say, what do I want this to taste like? Like, don't think that you're a failure because you have to go re-season it 2, 3, 4, 5, a dozen times. It'd be a failure to make something that doesn't taste good. You're being a perfectionist if you're tasting it. So keep that in mind. Now, this isn't something I normally do, but it was requested by Jeff, who loves my mushroom soup. We talked about adding a little bit of truffle oil into the soup. So I'm just gonna add a tiny little bit of this into the soup. Truffle oil can be very overpowering, so don't use a lot, but this will definitely add that truffly, mushroomy kind of flavor to it. Now, it's already got an amazing flavor on its own. I don't think it needs it, but I'm gonna do it because I told Jeff next time I made it, I would try it and see how it turns out. All right, there we have it. Our soup is done. I pulled it off the heat, shut off the burner because it is completely done. I'm gonna give it one final taste test to see if everything meshed nicely, which I'm sure it will. But now I'm gonna try it with that little bit of truffle oil in there. And if I like it this time, I might add more next time. And if I hate it, then I won't put it in next time. But let's see how it goes. Oh my God. You know, I can sit here all day and say how amazing this is, but it is just perfect. It's creamy, peppery, salty. You got that umami base from the mushrooms and that little bit of onion flavor in the chicken stock. Oh, I need to pour a bowl of this for myself right now and eat the whole thing. So that's what I'm gonna wanna do. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit the like button. And if you wanna see more cooking stuff, let me know what you wanna see me cook. I do have a sushi channel called Sushi Anything. It's likely gonna be out by the time this video's out. I have no idea when this video is gonna be out, but I'm glad I did this. You guys can see firsthand one of the best soups that I know how to make. I know I did. I know Jeff's gonna be super happy when I bring some of this over to him later. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time. Make sure to subscribe here for more stuff like this. And if you guys still only like me for my Minecraft content, head over to my Minecraft channel. See you there. Goodbye, everybody.